I really appreciate that. Okie doke. Well, thank you all for joining us for the May monthly meeting of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council. Tonight we have some really exciting guests. I am thrilled that we're doing this discussion tonight on such a timely topic. So many things happening in San Francisco's conversation about public safety right now, and so many interesting new proposals coming out, both to defund SFPD, reallocating resources towards new programs, as well as supplementing SFPD that's not necessarily a defund program, new programs that are really getting their start or have been around a while and are getting some additional attention. So tonight we're going to talk about our community safety. We're going to do that by chatting with some experts in this topic area. We're going to touch on SFPD. We're going to touch on the CART campaign, which is the community, help me, Sarah.
Passionate Alternative Response Team.
Thank you so much. The Compassionate Alternative Response Team, which is a proposal to do a community-based safety program. We also have on the call the Community Ambassadors Deputy Director Richard Whipple from, as I mentioned, it's out of the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs. So this is a civilian department, but we're going to learn about the Community Ambassadors Program, how long it's been around, and also the proposal from Supervisor Preston's office to bring community ambassadors to the Haight-Ashbury. And additionally, Commander Peter D. Walsh from SFPD is going to hopefully join us soon. I just got an email message that he's running a bit late, but he will be able to field questions about what SFPD's kind of stances in terms of ways and opportunities to create a safer community. We did invite Captain Pedrini, the captain of Park Station. He was out of town and said he couldn't make it, but he said he'd be happy to come to a future HANC meeting. And then additionally, we had tried to reach out to Captain Vaswani to join us. He had been a previous captain at Park Station. He's also heading the investigations department now, and that investigations group is working on that shooting that took place at Haight-Ashbury last month, when a homeless individual interfered with a car break-in, and a person exited the vehicle or shot through the vehicle at the person that was intervening in the car break-in. That is being still investigated by Captain Vaswani's group. So just, I'm going to give a minute or two of introduction about how this really became a topic of conversation. I mean, we've all been paying attention to the news, but I wanted to put out a couple pieces of information that I thought would be helpful in framing our conversation. And then I'm going to hand it off to our panelists and do an introduction, have each of them give an introduction of themselves, and to maybe talk about one or two things that they think are really critical for us as San Franciscans to focus on when we're talking about improving public safety. Okay, so a few introductory remarks. When we were talking about what should be our main meeting topic, George Floyd's murder was in the news. Derek Chauvin was convicted of second degree murder. And there's, been comparisons to that since the Rodney King incident in the 1980s, that we haven't really had this public national discussion around police accountability and the use of video to really help the public understand how, in particular, men of color are treated by police around the country. Obviously, there have been some major incidents in the Bay Area itself, including the Oscar Grant killing in 2009, where a BART police officer killed Oscar with a gun. Said the BART police officer said that they thought they were using their taser. In 2014, Alex Nieto was killed at Bernal Heights by 4 police officers. He was shot with multiple guns. And I'm not going to give an exhaustive list of incidents, but certainly this is not a new topic of conversation. How do we improve safety in our community? But since the Black Lives Movement has really taken a national stage and really made some great strides in raising awareness and educating us about what we really don't, as mostly people privileged and mostly people that are white, that are that we now have a better understanding than we have potentially in the past of the interaction between police officers and communities of color. San Francisco still has a ways to go. There was just a presentation yesterday at the Budget and Finance Committee about the number of people that were pulled over for things along the lines of expired registration and other equipment violations, potentially pretense for doing searches and then resulting in arrests. The African American population was found to be subject to 34% of those stops in 2019. So, both the African American and Latino populations have been disproportionately policed, and that is true in San Francisco as well. I know that Commissioner Hamasaki will be able to talk because he is much more expert than I am in the challenges that San Francisco has been struggling over the years to really address inequities in policing. Some major news across the Bay. Berkeley took the step to start deprioritizing certain police activities, including those types of stops for car registration by uniformed officers. And there was an extensive, I think it was 5-hour conversation yesterday among the members of the Budget and Finance Committee and members of the public, and the police chief was present as well, to talk about what additional reforms or reallocation of resources, perhaps away from SFPD, to look at calls for service, wellness checks, calls for service around homelessness issues, also other areas. The bomb squad was an example that was given, that maybe police officers do not necessarily need to be in those roles. Those could be made into civilian type responsibilities for the type of response they have. Okay, so I've done enough talking. We're gonna, I'm sure, get into so much more depth of the conversation. And as a reminder for those that have just joined, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat to all panelists so that we can see them. So we're gonna talk for probably about 45 minutes now, and then we'll have time, plenty of time, a half hour for Q&A. Okay. So if I could have each of our panelists briefly introduce themselves and maybe talk about what you think are 1 or 2 things that we really need to do as a community to make our community safer. And maybe I'll call on Commissioner Hamasaki to start.
Thank you, Kristen, and good evening to everybody. It's really nice to be here with you tonight. I think Kristen covered a lot of the things that I'm interested in, and I know a lot of the people in the community have expressed a strong interest in. You know, a lot of this, a lot of these topics have been talked about for years. I think the political activism that came out of George Floyd and the movement over last spring and summer and fall really gave a lot of life to moving forward and really, I think, taking these seriously in a way that it wasn't just, you know, the advocates, the activists, and the academics talking about them. But, you know, last year before George Floyd, the Police Commission adopted a resolution to transfer homeless-related calls away from SFPD, which I think is something that we can all agree about because, you know, the police should be reserved for, you know, serious criminal activity, danger, violence, things where we really need to have the police respond. Right now, you know, across the country and San Francisco, for too long, we've relied on police to fill in all the gaps in social services and mental health and substance abuse. And, you know, that's really has been an abysmal failure. You know, putting a burden on police that you know, they don't have the training for, and you know, the negative implications of that for the community. So two of the things that you mentioned that I think are really important is our programs like the CART model that Sarah's going to talk about. And then there's also been other programs that have started to be rolled out by the mayor's office and the board have been working together to address mental health crisis calls and substance abuse calls. You know, it's really early in the process, unfortunately. I'm really hopeful that we can ramp up the process a lot more than it has been because, you know, I think that anyone in San Francisco that's been here for a while, I've been here for, you know, over 27 years, has seen the struggles that our city has faced with mental health, with substance abuse, and other challenges. And, you know, really addressing these, putting them in the hands of the professionals, I think is a goal that we can all hopefully get around. The second thing that I think is really important that Kristen mentioned was the addressing racial disparities in police community interactions, right? And so there was the presentation that Kristen mentioned, and you know what the data has shown us is that there, even in 2021, there's a strong disparity in how people are stopped and searched in this city. And you know, one of the answers that I think is sort of low hanging fruit is to move. I think the language Berkeley used, I believe, is to deprioritize low-level traffic stops, which would be, you know, equipment violations, expired tags, things like that. And, you know, I think there is a culture in policing that historically those have been used as investigative tools. But the problem is, you know, when mainly Black and Latino people are the ones being targeted for those investigative tools, it's created a lot of problems in the relations within the community. So that's another area that I've been working on that I think is really interesting, and I'm glad the board is having a conversation about that. And that's something that I think is going to be very important for our city in the future. And with that, I'll wrap up.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that we have you and your expertise here tonight for this conversation. Sarah, do you want to talk about the CART campaign? This group, the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, had invited another member of the CART campaign. So we had a full hour presentation on it. But for those that may not have made that presentation, I think it was a couple months ago now, can you briefly summarize what the CART campaign is and where it stands?
Sure. As Kristen said, CART is the Compassionate Alternative Response Team, and that alternative is a key word there. It's the alternative to police response. And it is a community, and that's super big, model of responding to homelessness. And to be frank, one of the biggest sort of needs for it, I think, arose out of the folks who call the police because there's the visible presence of homeless people. And sometimes it's they're blocking my doorway, or there's a fight. And sometimes it's there's an encampment, etc. And so there's a few problems there. One being that honestly, the police are just not necessarily equipped to solve the problem, other than moving people along. They're not really responding to the root, which is the fact that these folks are homeless. Or sometimes there's mental health issues at play, or other needs people have, and the police that's not their training, nor do they have access to the right resources. And then the other is, what Kristen, was talking about in the beginning, about the danger of the risks of, things escalating and resulting in harm and or actual homicide, and a little bit of in between there, where the presence of police just will, criminalize in ways that are actually counterproductive to getting people off the streets and into housing. So such as, people receiving tickets that then become warrants, that then means they end up in jail, that then makes it much harder for them to pass a background check to get into housing. Like, that's just one example. But so anyway, CART is meant to be an alternative in providing folks that do have the expertise and the resources and the training, but also really the compassion and the community ties. And so the model includes a peer outreach worker and a mental health clinician type, and a medical person who would all go out together. I'm sorry, it's just the two, and would be able to respond to these calls and help, de-escalate, but also help really connect people to the resources and the services they need. And in terms of and this would not be, John mentioned the street crisis response teams. Right now, at least, those teams are dispatched through 911. One of the ideas in CART is that it would have some, very separate, process and number, so that, the issue of people not wanting to call 911 even when there's, crisis happening, would hopefully be resolved that way. And so then the process wise, the coalition basically came up with the whole development of the program. That's all there. The recommendations are in place. They've been, disseminated, shared with the public and with the decision makers. And it's really a matter of budgeting that will make this real. So the budget process is pretty much just starting now. It'll be going through June, and the mayor really needs to fund this to make it work, and it will. And that's the idea. Is that it will be city funded, but remain community based, because there's other ideas and models and being discussed and even being launched and being, but they're much more directly sort of city run. And it's really important to us that this remain community run. That's one of the key components of it. And when Kristen, you asked about one of the, forget how you phrased it, but one of the biggest things that needs to change or something like that, it is putting public safety, in my opinion, public safety solutions into the hands of the community as much as we possibly can, and having the community define what public safety is. A lot of people assume, well, public safety means there's more presence of law enforcement, and there's a lot of lighting, and there's more cameras on the street, and then in some people and some communities, they believe all of those things actually put them more at risk and make them less safe. And so their definition of public safety would be really different. So I think that that's important to, call from the communities itself in terms of their definition.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think we might have Commander Walsh on from SFPD now. Just want to make sure he's unmuted.
One moment.
Okay, great. While we're waiting for him to be unmuted, Richard Whipple, would you be able to introduce yourself and talk about very briefly the origins of the Community Ambassadors Program and where it's currently operating and what community ambassadors do for our city?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me here today, everyone. I'm happy to be with you and to speak on this issue from our kind of little vantage point. My name is Rich Whipple, and I work in the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs. And one of our kind of biggest kind of keystone programs is our Community Ambassadors Program. And so that's what I've been asked to speak about today. Our Community Ambassador Program, just for a big picture, is a community safety and neighborhood engagement job training program. Its origins actually stem from 10 years ago in 2010, when there were some incidents of violence in District 10, so in Bayview and Visitation Valley neighborhoods in particular. And the violent attacks in all situations were targeting Asian residents. Sadly, in this moment, we're seeing history repeat itself in a very similar way. So for us as a program, we've been thinking a lot recently about our history and about our model. So our program was originally created because we heard a lot from the community in District 10, from all different community members, all different neighborhoods and races, and kind of perspectives, that there was an interest in having increased multilingual city services and workers, inclusive of police officers, but also that there was an interest in having a community-driven safety model that was not associated with the police department, because many of the community members at the time expressed their own kind of fear or concerns about feeling really a relationship of trust with SFPD in that moment. So we actually partner closely with SFPD. We partner with MTA, with other city agencies. The attacks in 2010 happened to be centered on or near kind of Muni, either in a vehicle or on a Muni transit line. So we used all that information to put together a team of community members to provide a visible safety presence. And that was the original concept. We were never given a budget initially in 2010. We were asked to throw together a volunteer program. We laughed at that because full-time volunteers are not very easy to come by. So we partnered from our earliest stages with the Human Services Agency's Jobs Now program. And if you're not familiar, Jobs Now is a job training program for San Francisco residents that receive some form of public benefits, whether that might be food stamps, CalWorks, or other benefit programs. So it ended up being a good partnership in the sense that we were able to hire San Francisco residents, community members, really from those very neighborhoods that we were asked to provide a street safety presence. So our model from the beginning, and kind of the reason that the Ambassador Program lives and operates under the Immigrant Affairs Office, which everyone is confused by. They're like, y'all do immigration stuff. Like, why the hell do you have a community safety team? Like, shouldn't this be PD? Shouldn't this be this other program? And I think it's because from the beginning, we have a lot of expertise around language access and a focus on cultural competency and multilingual abilities. I obviously am not multilingual myself, but our team really represents the language needs and the cultural needs of the communities that we work in. So fast forward now, our teams have kind of expanded from just being in District 10, so Bayview and Viz Valley. We were asked to create a team in the Tenderloin mid-market area in 2011, and then a team in Chinatown in 2015, and in the Mission, I think in 2014. And so I think the common thread through all of those is that we're in neighborhoods with high social service needs, with high kind of foot traffic and activity around a commercial corridor, and usually in high immigrant neighborhoods, which kind of, again, aligns with our core mission and our work. So we've partnered really closely with community organizations to do our trainings. One of our longtime trainers is Laura Guzman, who I know is heading up a lot of the exciting work with Sarah and with CART. And we just met with CART a few weeks ago, and we're personally really excited to be a part of that work because we really believe strongly in a community-based, non-police response to many of the social kind of service needs that we see on the street. So we partner a lot with Hospitality House, with Mission Neighborhood Resource Center, with other groups to provide kind of community-based de-escalation, trainings on wellness checks, linkages. Our framing is that we, again, we're one part community safety, but we're one part engagement and kind of referral and information. So as a program, we don't have any shelter beds. We don't have any medical services. We just basically have information and referrals, and we connect to other entities, whether it's the HOT team or whether it's, part of the city's homeless response strategy. So that's just a little bit about our program. I think just to give a current update, I mean, the budget cuts have been challenging. We as a division are parked under the city administrator's office. So we're kind of within that kind of city bureaucracy. We work really closely in partnership with a lot of the other groups that are kind of doing work in our communities. There's groups like Urban Alchemy. There are different community benefit districts that have hired different kind of guide or ambassador programs. And we know there are now, and especially in the mid-market and Civic Center area, there's really a lot of different types of uniforms circulating around. And so I think to answer kind of the prompt at the beginning, I think a big need for us is alignment and coordination, both in terms of how the work is done on a day-to-day basis, but also just in terms of values and how we want to approach our community members that are in need, that may be unhoused, or that may be experiencing other crises in the street. So we're just one piece of a really big landscape, and we're happy to be here and kind of contribute to the conversation. Given the budget cuts, our office is kind of struggling to retool our ambassador program to kind of stay functional in our current committed neighborhoods. But I'll be honest, it's definitely a challenge. I know that there's a lot of challenging conversations around investment in this moment, and so we are respectful and mindful of that too. So thanks for inviting me and including me today.
Thank you. And I know that the proposal from Supervisor Preston's office is to add 10 community ambassadors to District 5 in Japantown and Haight, I believe. And I think, Bruce, if Avery, Jen Snyder, or Pat are on, they might be able to speak more specifically to Supervisor Preston's proposal. But while you might be finding them, to unmute them, I wanted to next introduce our last panelist, who was finally able to join us. Sorry about the link confusion there, Commander Walsh. And can you just confirm you can speak and we can hear you?
I can hear you and I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So we were just doing a brief introduction of each of our panelists, and was asking specifically, what are some of the major, top 1 or 2 things that you think really needs to happen to make our community safer? And I was wondering if specifically you could bring it down to, community policing and, the role that the community can play in creating public, a safe environment for our community from the SFPD's perspective.
Sure. So community policing is a really broad umbrella. It gets thrown around a lot. Some people see it as having beat officers walking up the Haight-Ashbury. Others see it as looking at how do we work around environmental things like a dark alley that might attract anything from nuisances to crime. And it kind of encompasses all of that. and getting the community involved. But one of the biggest things, and I think the discussion that I caught on end is this dynamic of not only non-governmental agencies, but also city agencies actually coming together. So community policing, I think police, as people have said, and what we're seeing right now, have become the focal point of a lot of social issues, whether we were in schools, whether if we were working, to look at homelessness and encampments and things like that. So it became community policing. And I think we're at this section where community policing is going to be more of a community response, with the police just being part of that community for a certain slice of the pie. So what I would say for community policing is what needs to be done, just as the police department gets held accountable and is looked to be, we try to be as transparent as we can. We have leadership from, I see Commissioner Hamasaki and other commissioners who push this. This needs to expand, I think, across that broad spectrum. And I am not here to criticize any of the other agencies that we work with. That's not my point, but I will use an illustration. We need to know when DPW comes out, what happens in those circumstances? What is the process that they move through when they do go to an encampment? What is the process when, for instance, I do a lot of work now with the street crisis response team as they're phasing in? What is happening to the clients that they meet on the street? It can't just be our points of contact. It needs to kind of be this whole arc of what is happening from beginning to end in contacts. And again, I go back to that community, because even if the police showed up to something we all consider as police related, you should know from A to Z what happened. I understand that, when it comes to substance abuse and mental health issues, that there are privacy concerns, but there's nothing that we can't show anonymously or in metrics that shows the community, hey, this citizen was concerned about something, or a person, a park, whatever it is, and here's how that went, and here's how that moves forward. And I think when you get that responsiveness from everybody, it actually guides that whole community feeling, which I think then endears safety. A lot of people look at safety as strictly in crime, but it's safety in everything. Do you have clean streets? Do you feel comfortable in the park or playground? And that's not just a police issue. It is a community and agency, and also non-governmental agency issue. And I think that's kind of where I think we all need to get community policing to go to, and send some of this responsibility to those who can handle it better than we can.
Thank you. Commissioner Hamasaki, I heard you say that change has been slow, and that you think that you're hopeful that we'll be able to accelerate some of the changes that we need to make. And I was wondering if you could speak to what our role is as community members to make that change speed up.
Well, I think the role of the community in San Francisco is a really important one, because the community can participate in a number of ways to advocate for the change it wants to see, right? That's through local politics, that's through public comment, that's through contacting your supervisors, the mayor's office, and supporting the organizations that are doing the work, like my fellow panelists tonight. And so, I don't want to diminish in any way the steps that have been taken with transitioning some of the calls to the street crisis intervention team. I think that's great. What I think is that that transition should happen faster. I mean, obviously, anything in city government, as maybe we all know, doesn't move as fast as we would like. But that's where the community can come in and say, hey, what we're seeing with these alternative responses is a really positive impact. The community is supporting the community through whether it's ambassadors, whether it's CART, whether it's street crisis. And it's also freeing up the police because, you know, while we've been really fortunate that San Francisco, and we're really fortunate to live in a city with low crime rates, but we do have, you know, a high property crime rate. Before the pandemic, it was car break-ins. Since the pandemic, it's turned to a lot of commercial burglaries and garage burglaries. And we've seen a real uptick in gun violence, right? And so if we're able to transition to non-police responses, to low-level non-criminal calls, which, you know, for whatever reason, 911 gets a lot of calls that are not actually criminal or do not require a police response. What that does is that frees up the police to dedicate their resources to issues where there are real problems in the community, and whether that's property crime. Obviously, the top priority has to always be, you know, violent crime, harm against an individual, against a person. You know, that's never acceptable in our communities. So, you know, I think this has to be a holistic community discussion about how we do this. But, you know, from the Haight-Ashbury perspective, you know, just really being involved. I know obviously the fact that we're having this meeting shows that the neighborhood and the community is involved. And I probably don't need to tell you how to get involved further, but it does make a difference. It makes a difference when we have public comment at the police commission, when we get letters at the police commission, and it's the same at the board and it's the same at the mayor's office, right? Hearing that the public is concerned can create change. And so I always encourage, even I get some less than kind public comments from time to time, or more than time to time. You know, I encourage people to be involved. It's what keeps our democracy functioning. So.
Great. Thank you so much. So one of the questions that we received from the audience was about the community ambassadors and where in D5 do you think the community ambassadors could help? And before I have you answer that, Mr. Whipple, I was going to ask Jen Snyder if she could kind of talk about Supervisor Preston's proposal and the petition link. I think that she also posted in the chat. Is Jen unmuted?
Yep. Hi. Hey, everyone. Commissioner Hamasaki, I'll give you a positive public comment. You are awesome. We really appreciate you in our office. Actually, everyone here is so damn awesome. And hi, Rich. I'm Jen in Dean's office. Yeah. So the community ambassador program, it was like this. We were outsiders when we got in, and we had these big grand ideas of like a force of community members who could be walking around the streets, like, you know, in vests, you know, being there and available for folks to talk to them about, you know, how can they get to this place, or do they know anyone who has services for this particular issue, or could they help them get from point A to point B, or, you know, alert folks to like medical needs and things like that. And then lo and behold, there was already such a thing. And so we were so happy to discover you, and so like surprised that it hadn't been elevated to a larger stage yet. And we would love to do that. And we don't want to overburden your budget at all. We would like 10 of you in District 5. Just because, you know, we've heard so much from the community of folks who feel like, you know, they would really love a presence of folks that do that kind of work. And there, you know, it totally sucks to get ripped off, you know, and it happens. And, you know, as Kristen said, there was an unhoused person who was almost shot by somebody who was taking a backpack out of a car and all this stuff. And it feels like oftentimes, especially, you know, during COVID, that sometimes there's just sort of crime of opportunity, and you know, if there's folks on the street, you know, wearing vests, authority figures with no no guns, that, it could help to deter some of those kinds of crimes, and certainly be, I mean, it's such an asset, and a resource to the community as well. So, yeah, we welcome it. I mean, we're open to all the ideas. We love CART. We love the idea of no more traffic stops, and, so we're here. I mean, who knows, how it will grow and change. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot, but we'd like to try some new things. Yeah.
Great.
And then,
Thank
yeah.
you, Jen.
No problem.
So, Rich, I was going to ask you to build on what Jen was saying. If we get community ambassadors in the Haight-Ashbury, I think some of the ideas that the supervisor's office has is that they should kind of be additional, just visible presence on the street, perhaps to deter car break-ins, which we have seen kind of a more aggressive type of car break-in along Haight Street during the pandemic. But I presume they could also give, say, directions to tourists who are lost, as well as potentially could help with maybe graffiti abatement type things. Can you talk about where the community ambassadors play those roles in other parts of the city today?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to speak to that. And I'm trying to take Jen with me every time I need to do a presentation because I really appreciate that energy and that love. But in terms of what we do, it's kind of a very general services type of approach, meaning that we are a helpful presence on the street. And so that can look like multiple forms of support in terms of public spaces. So to be more concrete, wellness checks of anybody on the street, whether it's a homeless person, or whether it's somebody who's a tourist, or whether it's someone who is a small business owner. We do definitely conduct 311 reports of things like graffiti, litter, like needles. We do a lot of social service referrals and information dissemination. So for example, right now, all of our teams are doing a lot of outreach around free tax prep for folks that are low income. So we do have kind of like seasonal things that we do. And then we partner with a lot of the neighborhood-based Project Homeless Connect programming and events to kind of connect and link folks to existing services. So I would say if we were to have a team in D5, we would want to get a good sense of the service providers right in D5 and then the particular neighborhoods. And we would want to make sure that we have strong linkages with the small businesses, with the social service agencies, and then with our other sister city agencies. So that's kind of our general approach. Our structure is that we usually have one kind of team lead and then the remaining ambassadors of that team that kind of work day to day under them. Right now, our ambassadors operate Monday through Fridays just because of our limits on budget and capacity. So it's a weekday program right now, but that's just how we've been historically. So those are some of the things that we would do and how we would do them. But I think very much as Jen said, it's just kind of like a general helpful presence, whether somebody needs directions or whether there's an intention that we are preventing crime from happening.
Great. And in other districts, do the community ambassadors work with, say, like the CPAB of those local stations?
When we first started back in 2010 and 2011, I think we had a lot closer kind of collaboration with the different district stations. I think that's very much something we would like to do going forward. But I think just over the years and over staff transitions on our end and on the other end, we just kind of lost touch. But I think that's very much something that we would love to do. Our ambassadors leads for each team attend every monthly meeting, SFPD meeting, and try their best to be aware of what's going on in terms of needs, in terms of crimes and property crimes, all those types of things. So yeah, I mean, I think that's an area we would like to look into further.
Terrific, thank you. And I presume you work closely with supervisor's office as well as, since you're an office of the mayor, you're working with multiple elected officials and identifying needs as well.
Yeah, and in fact, I think we're only as effective as we are in our ability to partner. I think somebody asked the question what we would do in District 5. We currently don't operate there, so we're not the experts at all in D5. And so I think we would really rely heavily on you all and on Jen and the supervisors team to make sure we're doing the right things and entering that space in the appropriate way. So yeah, I think we would only be as successful as that partnership. And we're not technically part of the mayor's office. We are under the city administrator's office, which is why we're like the forgotten stepchild of like community outreach teams. But yeah, just to clarify that piece too.
Great. And I saw Lisa, you posted a couple of questions in the chat. Would you like to go ahead and ask them yourself?
Sure. So community ambassadors, who are these people, and do they live in the community, and how are they chosen? Are they chosen by the mayor or the mayor's office, or are they, how does that, how does one become a community ambassador, and do they have training?
That is a great question. So we, as I mentioned before, it is a job training program, which I think is really great because it's providing a lot of folks like access into city jobs in many ways, or access into social service jobs. So we actually primarily use the Jobs Now program as our hiring pipeline. So Jobs Now, as I shared earlier, is part of our human services agency and is a job training and placement program that is specifically for San Francisco residents. So in general, we will coordinate with them to do recruitments, and that our team in the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs, we interview candidates directly that have been, placed in the job training program by our human services agency. And then we select them and place them to work in our different ambassador teams. So because we have 5 different teams right now, we do try to place people in neighborhoods that they reside or have familiarity with. That's not always possible because we can't necessarily geographically limit, the candidates from Jobs Now. But it ends up being that a lot of folks end up being from the neighborhoods that we operate in as well. So I think that would be our intention. After people complete 1 year with Jobs Now, it's a 1-year program. Those who've done like a really great job, we may hire for an additional 2 years to kind of build that chunk of time to really learn the job and to be able to kind of step the ladder towards another city job. So it's kind of a combination of positions that we have funded in our office and then it's kind of subsidized and supplemented through Jobs Now.
Terrific. And I'm taking questions now from the chat. So if you have questions, do go ahead and post them in the chat. So from Kat and Richard, question, how do both the ambassador program and CART differ from the mayor's proposal to use the fire department and the HOT team? And what are the budget needs of each?
That is a really big question that I am probably not the best person to answer because I can't speak to those other programs. I think in general, an important distinguishing piece is that we don't administer street medicine. We don't hold or operate any facilities or beds or shelter spaces in that way. So I think some of the other recommendations are folks that are administering some of those services. I also think in our conversations with CART, I think we felt very strongly about having a community-based response that's trained with universal protocols that are community grounded and community based in terms of how we would approach a situation and when and how that would escalate to get other folks involved. So I think we've been very keen to think about like how we align and partner with CART because it seems to be a very natural space. I think we've always viewed the homeless outreach team as an important partner as well. But I think there's been shifts over the years in terms of like the direction and approach of the team and just the scope. Because I know there's been times where they've only been focused on actually transporting folks, to and from different medical sites or sobering centers, or where they have like limited case management bandwidth. So I think it's really imperative that we all partner closely together, but I honestly can't speak very much to what's happening right now with the HOT team or the mayor's current proposal, other than like the same level of headlines. that I think we've all
Maybe
done.
Sarah can.
Yeah,
since I
so
know
what the
Sarah-
question is referring to is just, I think yesterday, maybe the day before, anyway, the mayor announced the launch, the future launch of something that they're calling the Street Wellness Response Team, as opposed to the Street Crisis Response Team. And it reads like strikingly similar to the CART model. There's definitely some politics at play here, I'll just say. but there's some very clear distinctions. But there's also just really not enough information in that it was a press release, so we don't know fully. There was a question about the cost. The mayor's program is 9 million. CART is about 6.9. And the mayor's program involves teams consisting of fire department, EMTs, and the hot team. And so that's really different than having like peer outreach workers, people from the community with lived experience, which is what CART emphasizes. And then I'd say otherwise it's pretty nebulous in terms of, what this wellness team would really look like and how it would operate. But those are two big things, especially it's basically city workers, city running the whole show with the wellness response teams. Also, it hinges on getting the funding still, and it is proposed for, I think, 2 years down the road. So it's also a little bit questionable about, I guess, how real the whole thing is, and if it's just meant to kind of be placed in the way of CART succeeding. And there's probably some other, distinctions and critiques I would have of it. But it doesn't seem to, so the CART model is really clear about its like two-pronged approach, that it's about that sort of de-escalation component, but it's also about building community and really doing things like educating neighbors about homelessness and sort of helping develop mutual aid networks, and bringing in neighbors to help do the outreach work and help support CART, and then also supporting the houseless folks. So not just being a tool that people call because they don't like the presence of homeless people, but also something that the houseless folks themselves could use it to call about disputes they're having with a neighbor, for instance, or some needs they have around being on the street that's turning into sort of crisis. Or a neighbor could call and be like, I'm really concerned about this person, that kind of thing. And the mayor's program seems to just go through 911 as far as I can tell. So that would be another concern. But yeah, otherwise it's like we need to dive deeper into it and have some conversations. And if I can, I will throw the press release into the chat so people can read about that further too.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And yeah, I got the impression too that was breaking news, and we definitely need to all learn more about it. And the mayor's office, I'm sure, will be more forthcoming in presentations to the Board of Supervisors in upcoming budget and finance meetings so that we can learn more about it. So I do have a number of other questions that are kind of a range of different topics. And so it's gonna sound like I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I'm going to try to keep questions that are like one another with like. And so actually, can Tess be unmuted? Tess sent several different questions, and I wanted Tess to be able to go ahead and ask the next question, Bruce.
She's unmuted, and so is we have a caller with a question.
Thank you, and we'll take the caller next. Thank you. Go ahead, Tess.
Okay, do the police do white collar crime too, or not? And what will they do if they're not answering all these homeless and mental health calls? Because I understand that makes up the majority of their call outs.
Mm-hmm. So I think 15% was the number that I heard in yesterday's presentation, calls that would be like wellness checks or mental crisis calls. Is that accurate, Commissioner Hamasaki or Commander Walsh?
I don't know. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner. Okay. I don't know the what everybody's referring to as yesterday, but what I'll tell you is that just one thing I'd like to say about SCRT, only because I'm involved in it and trying to get them to take their calls. They're focused very narrowly right now on we rate our calls A, B, and C. And so right now they respond to B priorities that have people in mental distress. That person can't have weapons, they can't be violent, and they cannot be in a private place. The last thing that they want to do, for instance, would be go into an apartment complex where they don't know who else is in a home or things like that. I will say, though, that there are 3 people on that team, just so everybody kind of gets an idea, and they are only dispatched through 911, because what this experiment right now, or pilot program, I should say, is what calls can they take off the police department's plate? So in order to analyze it, that's why it's going through those numbers. But they have a community paramedic. They have a clinician from, I think it's Health Right 360, but they also do contract out through RAMS, which is from Richmond, where they do get a peer support person on that 3-person team. And they're expanding and they're moving into those calls. The last numbers I saw with them, depending on how you break them down, are they're handling in the several months. I think they're now on their 4th team, might have just started on the 10th. I believe that they are somewhere plus or minus 20% for that singular type of call at this point. So I don't have a whole number on that. We have a meeting every other week. So next week will be our meeting to go over the numbers that we work with them and trying to figure this out. We don't call them at this point. If we still get a call, we go. And the reason for that, I know there's been some confusion. We've really tried to message that is they're limited and they get a choice right now of whether they're going to respond or not and whether they're available with these teams during any certain hour. So if you look at the city as a whole, their maps also don't match up per se with police districts. So they're in the Bayview and they've taken a huge chunk of what we would consider the Bayview Police District, but they also encompass the Southern Police District, part of the Mission and part of the Ingleside. Very, very big area. And that's one team per 12-hour shifts as they're going through this. But they are out there. They are handling calls. So I don't think we'll ever be completely out of the business of responding to somebody who may be in a crisis when they meet a more dangerous criteria. What we're trying to do is, and what I think everybody understands on this in this meeting is the calls that we don't have to respond to. That person who does need a well-being check, who might be sitting on a park bench muttering to themselves, confused, things like that, where someone's sleeping in a doorway, where they're not active or they're not causing harm, but they need that resource output. So that's kind of where we are on that. And just on a side question, I saw that you asked about white collar crimes. We're very limited in white collar crimes. We do have a fraud section. We do have, they look into computer fraud, internet scams, fraud, things like that. But mostly those bigger cases are handled by federal agencies because they tend to not be local. They tend to be either multi-state, multi-jurisdictional, or even international. Just to answer that little piece for you.
Perfect. Thank you. Commissioner Hamasaki, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Commander Walsh answered the question as far as, the deployment and rollouts. As Commander Walsh said, it's really a small program right now. I think there was an article a few weeks ago that the number of actual responses that they've handled start to finish has been pretty low, but I think, there's a lot of positive signs coming out of it. And, a lot of indicators that this is a positive way forward. I know Sarah and Cart have modeled in part on a very successful program called Cahoots that has been around, I think, like 14 years, that also does very similar work and is very, they got overwhelmed during the discussions last summer when everybody was talking about this, and Cahoots was presenting in every jurisdiction, like, oh, there's somebody that's actually been doing this on the ground for many years. We do, I really do think we need that element as well. The experienced community, people that are closer to the community, that have, the expertise in working with the populations that the calls are coming for. So, overall, it's a slow start, but it's a positive start. And I think, I'm sure we're gonna have 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But we're moving in the right direction. I think that's a positive thing.
Terrific. Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of number of people in each of these roles helps put each of them into perspective, right? I think is it over about 2,000 police officers? Is that accurate?
It's pretty close to that, yes.
Okay.
I don't have the exact.
And in terms of number of crisis team members?
Oh, how many are trained?
No, how many there are total citywide?
I'm sorry, because I'm missing the question. Are you asking how many actual police officers there are, or how many are trained in crisis intervention?
No, sorry, I'm asking for the crisis response team.
Oh,
how many people are in that role?
So I don't have a total number. This is what I do know. In fact, let me just grab it real quick. They are running 4 teams right now. It started in the Tenderloin, and it's a 3-person team, but they divide this 12-hour shift 7 days a week. So I don't know how many.
So like 12 FTEs or exactly.
Yeah, I don't know that number, but they're on any given 12-hour shift, they're running 3 people. And as described, it is Department of Public Health, Health Right 360 person, DPH contracted with RAMS for a peer specialist, and then lastly, a paramedic from the fire department.
Yeah.
And they're right now, I think they are in 3 of what their districts would be. The Tenderloin, which is actually bigger than the Tenderloin, Bayview, which I described, and the second one was actually the Mission Castro area.
Yes,
so they're running those teams right now.
And as Jen Snyder just posted, they're supposed to expand to meet the needs of the whole city by the end of the summer. I believe they said July or August, but we also have started to see them in the Haight, not regularly, but occasionally or rarely, I'd say. Yeah.
And there's a new team, brand new team just launched 3 days ago that is going to be Chinatown North Beach waterfront. So that's brand new. And I keep, every time they announce anything, I'm like, what about the Haight?
But it's early days still for these programs. So yeah, this is, and in the scale of the 2,000 officers that are staffing the city citywide, you can understand it's a very small program in comparison to SFPD. I don't want to forget the caller that we have on the line that had a question. Is that Karen?
Yeah. And actually now I have 2 questions.
Go for it.
The one that came up just now was, why are these people on 12-hour shifts? That sounds like it's burnout time very quickly.
I don't know. What I should say is, so I'm looking at they are on 12-hour shifts. So that's, the fire department is, I believe, usually on a 24-hour shift. So for this, that would be more of a question for why they have them on that shift. So I'm looking at Mission Castro, and their operation hours are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So
yikes.
And again, when you get this going, it's similar. So the police department runs 10-hour shifts. But what it does is there's overlap. And my assumption, and I know they say never assume, would be that there will be overlapping shifts at some point. So that 12 hours isn't necessarily all out on the street. I do know that when they have to deal with medical issues, that does have a lot of downtime in the sense of they're catching up with paperwork. One of their goals is to not admit people, get them before they get to the emergency room. So there's a lot of that going on. Why 12 hours? That would be a question for SCRT.
Okay, and then my original question was, and if this was in the presentation and I missed it, I apologize. But when the ambassadors start off in a new area, do they partner with community people and community services to kind of create a bridge between themselves and the people that they're going to be working with out in the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is absolutely. So I think when we launched our mission team, we actually operated out of the Mission Neighborhood Resource Center, which is a great location around Cap Street that provides great resources for the unhoused community in the Mission. And then in Chinatown, the concerns were more around safety and really centered in Portsmouth Square. And so there we partnered with Self-Help for the Elderly, which runs a lot of the programming out of the clubhouse there and had a lot of concerns around safety escorts for seniors. So our teams not only partner closely, but in some cases start and end their shifts out of community partner sites. So yeah, definitely. And we'd be keen to know who those partners are in your district if we were to have a team there and how to best arrange that.
And so is there some way that you're identified when people see you, they can identify that you are partnering with people they trust?
So as a program, we just have our own kind of branded yellow jackets that say Community Ambassador on the back. But we don't have anything that like specifically visually connects us to our community partners. It's kind of like a long-term relationship building strategy, I would say at this point.
You might want to give it some thought. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion.
Great. So I think we wanted to also bring up, something that's been a concern to this group, which is, the February 2020 shooting, which took place at Haight-Ashbury. A street musician, Tad Crane, was shot by an off-duty FBI officer, and SFPD responded to that shooting. As a community, we held a meeting right before the pandemic to talk about, community safety, and specifically, it was understood that perhaps this off-duty officer had been in a local Haight Street bar and had discharged his weapon. And there was very strong concern that there be some transparency and accountability for this officer. To date, it's been over a year. There's been no release of details, including the officer's name or whether he was administered a breathalyzer test and what the results of those tests were. We've not had information about whether or not he was disciplined or removed from the FBI, or if he's even still present and working in San Francisco and maybe patronizing bars in our community still. And so I think this issue of transparency, Commissioner Hamasaki, I know that the FBI does not fall under your jurisdiction, but can you talk about, the real challenges that we have in creating transparency in a situation like this, and what can this community do to try to get answers? We were told that, in about a year's time, we would hear more details, and that's not been the case. I don't know if you have any advice on that. And again, SFPD was, the investigating agency in collaboration with FBI, as I understand.
Right. And on what the SFPD has, perhaps Commander Walsh might have more information. And so I don't have any specific information about this incident. I did want to acknowledge, though, that we did have a police shooting last week, and there was a town hall for it today. And, I thought this was a very positive development that Chief Scott, for the first time in the time I've been on the commission, came out and acknowledged that the shooting was improper and apologize to the individual that was shot. And, you know, it may seem like a small thing to some people, but to me, you don't really see that very much in a lot of what we've seen around the negative aspects of policing that have been happening across the country. So, you know, I do think that accountability and transparency are fundamental to you know, allowing the community to have trust and faith in policing. And, you know, SFPD has made a lot of strides in that area. The DOJ reforms have, I think, helped with that. But, you know, as far as advocating for, you know, the release of a specific investigation, Commander Walsh would probably know if there was an investigation of a police shooting. I don't know how that would work when the FBI is involved, because there may be some multi-jurisdictional issues that might impact that. I don't know, Commander Walsh, do you have any information?
I was one of the guest speakers with then Captain Pagano at the meeting at the bookstore that night. And so this is a really unique situation. And now remember, I'm a commander of patrol, so I don't work on the other side of the house, which would be investigations, where normally this type of event would go. And so as memory serves, the FBI, I believe there's a federal law that gives them jurisdiction over their personnel. So even though it happened locally, and if it was just a regular person, it would be considered a shooting within San Francisco, that I believe superseded, again, if memory serves me right. I do know that we responded out, obviously not knowing what it was at whatever point that in time. The FBI subsequently came out to take over, and I believe they take all the evidence. We would only have the initial report per se. Where that would be in the sense of us releasing it would probably be a question, again, because it's part of the evidentiary file, I would assume, for the feds. I don't know. I could guess that we may have jurisdiction in the sense of releasing it, but I don't know, because I don't know. We don't know if a grand jury took place. We don't know if any of this stuff at that federal level took place. I don't have any information on where that agent is or any discipline. It's a completely different agency, and as you know, they're national. I've worked with the FBI on public corruption cases, and just like they can be literally in San Francisco for a month and then they're gone and they're, you know, somewhere else in the United States. And I'm just talking on a regular basis, not even if there's any discipline or issues involved. So that's the most that I know. I think your inquiries would be probably directed to the federal building on Golden Gate to find out if there's any information or anything. Now, if an indictment came out, you'd obviously know publicly if that happened. Their process tends to be a lot longer than ours when you see these cases. I don't know what steps the DA's office took, if any. So I'm not going to speak for them. They are technically a separate law enforcement agency that does have investigative powers and things like that. So they may have information I'm not privy to. But once the FBI came in, they kind of just took the whole case.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like, James, you have a follow-up question about that. I don't know, Bruce, if you can mute James to ask his question.
Thank you. So if we are following up with the feds, I guess the determining body which would decide whether charges or whatnot would be brought would be the Assistant USA Attorney's Office out of San Francisco. Is that correct?
I don't even want to go that far, and let me tell you why. The team that came out to investigate this case, what took them the approximate day, I would, for lack of a better term, their internal affairs team, their shooting team, whatever you'd like to call it, came out from Quantico, Virginia. So I don't know if they have to apply the same jurisdictional rules in the fact that, yeah, it did happen in the Northern California district, but I can't answer that. But I will tell you that a whole team came out from Quantico to take over the investigation.
I'll just say for the record that as a bar owner, I was not asked for the video for my bar, which I would have very happily provided. I know that there's several bars along Heat Street, but I'm not aware that any bar owner was asked for videotape. So anyway, it was very concerning that even the basic question, like, was there a breathalyzer administered, whether or not that had taken place. Yeah. Okay, I don't know, I want to make sure that I got to everyone's questions, and if I didn't ask your question and it's still a burning question, can you repost it in the chat for me? If not, if there's no further questions, what I'd love to do is have us kind of have like a parting few thoughts from each of our panelists on things that they would ask of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, maybe one or two things that we might focus on in the next couple months to really try to work to move the dial forward on some of these necessary changes for improving community safety. And I'm not seeing any other questions pop up in the chat. So let's go ahead and start with you, Commander Walsh, if that's okay.
I would just like to say on the community safety, please stay involved, as Commissioner Hamasaki said, particularly with the police department. I know that there's a lot of things going on nationally and there's a lot of things going on locally that sometimes that trust factor isn't there. But I can tell you have a great captain in Chris Pedrini. I know that the officers that walk the Haight thoroughly enjoy that beat. They enjoy the merchants and the community that is there. You will be opening up. We cannot do our job without you. And so please realize that we are trying to do the best we can. We will try to continue to build and maintain the trust with you. But we want you also to remember as a San Franciscan that we are part of the community too. And we just want to build on that relationship. And please get involved with your local station.
Yeah, and just so you're aware, I don't think we got a chance to talk. You were on back-to-back video calls after you contacted me today to let me know you'd be here. The Haight-Ashbury Merchants Association and the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council both had seats on the CPAB, but Captain Petrini asked our representatives off the CPAB. So we actually have been asking for a couple months now for a HAMA and HANC representative to be added back to the CPAB. So I'll just put that out there in case you want to relay that message back to Captain Petrini. Yes, we would love to continue to stay involved with our local station. And I believe the CPAB is an effective place for that to take place. Commissioner Hamasaki.
Thank you. And thanks again for inviting me and all of us here tonight to speak with you. And I think it's really important that we all stay engaged as a community around these issues of public safety. You know, what I would say, in addition to what I said before about being involved is, you know, we're coming into budget season. And so the ambassadors, CART, the department, you know, however you focus as individual community members, what you believe the future of public safety in this city should look like, this is the time to advocate to the Board of Supervisors and of course to the mayor's office. You know, you can advocate to the police commission, but we don't really actually do anything other than approve a budget. But that all happens at the Board of Supervisors and the mayor's office. So, you know, really, if you want to see the innovative new approaches that we've talked about here tonight, this is a really crucial time where your voices can make a significant difference. So, you know, I would encourage everybody to speak up and be heard on this.
Thank you so much. Mr. Whipple?
Yeah, I would actually echo everything Commissioner Hamasaki said. I think weighing in is really important, especially at a time when a lot of investments are being made and a lot of solutions are being discussed. And I think it's really best when those solutions and those investments are guided by neighborhood and community input. And I think luckily there's a lot of different options out there, and the city is definitely trying, to figure out the best way to address the community need. But again, I think that's best informed when the residents are at the table.
Thank you. And Sarah, last but not least.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're heading into budget season, and that's what it takes to get CART off the ground, is to get the funding support. I forgot, that's one other obvious difference between the mayor's wellness teams and CART is where the funding comes from. The mayor's going to use funding that is, going to be taken from probably some other programs, or, competing with some of the other needs we have. Whereas, close your ears, Commander, but the CART model does identify funding, from the police budget and divert it into this, understanding that we're taking a lot of the load off the police, that they won't need as much staffing and funding to do their jobs if we're doing some of it. So that's going to mean directly advocating for CART, but it's also going to mean just being part of that conversation at City Hall with the budget around, funding for law enforcement versus where can we do the work in other ways, and therefore reprogram the funding. We're pretty committed to that. That's where the funding needs to come from. But just generally, at the end of the day, I think it's the broad message is we need this program. We need it now. We need it to remain community controlled and community based. And the only way we get all of that is through funding support from the city.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And before we close off the Zoom call, I wanted to give the opportunity for Pat, who's posted a couple links in the chat, to be unmuted to talk about the links that Pat is providing to the group.
Hey everybody, it's Pat from Neighbors United. Yeah, I just dropped the 2 different petitions. The first one is for the Community Ambassador Program. Jen dropped the same link earlier. And then the second one is for the Prop I petition. As probably many of you remember, Prop I was on the ballot last November. We passed with 58% of the vote, and it provides, or it's supposed to provide money for rent relief, and then also to build more affordable housing. Unfortunately, Mayor Breed, in the upcoming, budget, she is trying to take that money and put it into the general fund, where it wouldn't be spent on those 2 very important, tasks. So we're trying to spread this petition around, hopefully get, around 1,000 people or so. We're already getting pretty close to that number, but still have a little bit to do. And yeah, we want to get a lot of people to sign it and submit it to the mayor, just to let her know that people are not too happy about this, and that we want the Prop I funds to be spent on rent relief, and then also to build more affordable housing, and to not go into the general fund.
Thank you, Pat. And also, if we could unmute James real quick. I think you had one last question I accidentally skipped over that you'd asked very early on in the meeting, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to get your question in there.
Thanks, Kristen. No worries. I had a question on relating to other government agencies within the city, specifically the National Park Service, Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which has a large homeless population as well. And just wondering, in what ways do your organizations and does the city collaborate with GGNRA, or is it generally just their law enforcement happens to deal with it? Thanks.
did you want, James, did you want Commander Walsh to answer that, or?
Oh, thank you. Yes, it would be great to hear from Commander Walsh and the gentleman from the city. Really, anybody if you have experience working with them, but starting with Commander Walsh. Thank you.
We do work with the park police, but not necessarily to deal with homeless or mental health issues. It is a completely different jurisdiction. I mean, if somebody ran into the Presidio per se, we could chase them under different rules and have to make an arrest. But when they deal with things that happen on their property, they'll let us know about it, but it is their jurisdiction. So we don't do a lot of collaboration that way in any of the type of issues that we're talking about. They are their own agency with their own jurisdiction.
And real quickly, follow up, who within SFPD would be a good point of contact if I was able to facilitate some sort of collaboration?
Specifically about this type of issues, or law enforcement in general?
About homeless and managing it in I guess a broader sense than from the law enforcement perspective.
I would refer you to Commander Daryl Fong, who is in our community engagement division.
Great. And James, I think you're on mute if you're.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I will try to reach out to Mr. Fong.
Super. Okay. Well, everyone, we've done it again. Another monthly meeting of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council has successfully been pulled off. So thank you all so much for your participation tonight. As is our custom, we're going to stop the recording and leave the link open for a while if people just want to casually chat, say hello neighbor to neighbor. Our panelists are, of course, welcome to linger too. Thank you all so very much to our panelists tonight. I know it's a really big ask to ask you to come spend an hour and a half on your Thursday evening with us. Thank you so very much.